الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا صدق الله العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, through the tawfiq and fadl of Allah Ta'ala, we have completed the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Baqarah, and we just completed the tafsir of the entire Surah Al-Imran. Now, inshallah, we are moving on to the fourth surah in the Quran, which is known as Surat An-Nisa, and we will begin the tafsir regarding this surah. And as normal, before we begin any surah, we have to know the background of the surah. What type of surah is it? What does it contain? What does it talk about? Surah An-Nisa is a Madani surah. We explained this in the beginning of every surah, that every surah is either Makki or Madani. A Makki surah refers to that surah which was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was in Mecca, prior to his hijrah and migration to Medina. And as you may suggest, a Madani surah refers to that surah which was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after he migrated from Mecca to Medina. And majority of the Makki surah, it deals with three things. Number one, Tawheed, establishing the oneness of Allah. Number two, Risala, establishing the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also establishing the hereafter as well. And it only makes sense because in the initial life and the initial stages of the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Muslims, they were in need of Tawheed, to affirm their Tawheed, to make sure they have proper beliefs, to make sure they have proper aqidah. This was very important and essential in the initial stages in the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After the Muslims, their aqidah and their belief became established a little bit better, more Muslims came into Islam, and Rasulullah migrated to Medina. Now there was a need of laws, how to live according to the laws of Allah Ta'ala. So the Madani surahs, majority of them discuss laws, ahkam of sharia, Islamic legal principles and laws. Majority of the Madani surah, a large portion of it deals with laws. So Surah An-Nisa is a Madani surah. And like we explained, this surah is filled with Islamic and Shari'i law. In fact, this is the surah that contains the most laws of Sharia. You will not find a surah that has more laws than Surah An-Nisa. This surah discusses both internal and external affairs for the Muslims. This surah discusses ataqullah, moral law. And as one may suggest from the name of the surah, Surah An-Nisa means the surah regarding women. This surah discusses a lot of laws and rulings concerning and pertaining to women. A lot of laws pertaining to family life, husband and wife. A lot of laws pertaining to society as well. And majority of the laws are behind and concerning women and family, which is why this surah was given the name and the title of Surah An-Nisa. The beginning of this surah discusses laws regarding the rights of women and the rights of orphans, especially the female orphans. Now, not only are they female, but they are orphans as well. So the beginning of the surah, throughout the surah, discusses the rights of women and the rights of orphans. These orphans who were in the care of their family members, how were they treated? What was being done to them? and the laws that are protecting the rights of the orphans are mentioned in the beginning of the surah. The rights of the women were established with regard to their mahar, their dowry, their earnings, their marriage. And this surah rescued the women from the injustices that were being done to them prior to Islam, in the days of Jahiliyyah, in the days of ignorance, and also rescued them from oppressive traditions that were being done to the women. So this surah, it actually protects the dignity of women. This surah preserves the rights of women. This surah calls towards justice for women. And from this we learn that Islam was the first to give the rights to the woman before anybody else, before any civilization, before any country. Islam was the first to give the rights to the woman. Prior to Islam, in the days of Jahiliyyah, the women, they were bought and sold in the markets like furniture. The women, they had no legal rights. Their rights were not protected at all. The women, not only were they refused from gaining a share in the inheritance, but they were the inheritance themselves. What does this mean? When a husband would pass away, his inheritance would not go to the wife. That was far away. But rather, the woman was a piece of the property of the husband. Meaning that the family members of the husband would have the right to inherit the wife of their deceased family member, their deceased male family member. So not only were they barred from receiving a share of the inheritance, but they were also inherited by different men without any choice of their own. It was forced. This was all of these things were being done prior to the coming of Islam, or to the laws of Sharia. Islam gave women their rights 1400 years ago, well prior to any Western civilization. Nowadays, it is being told to us that it is the West that gave the rights to the women, and oftentimes Islam is attacked for their rights upon women. And it is very important we discuss this in details in order to protect our religion, in order to understand what is the reality and what is the truth, because the truth is unknown to the people. They think that Islam is oppressive to the woman, whereas it is the opposite. It was Islam that treats the woman as royalty. It is Islam that dedicates an entire surah, one of the longest surahs, the surah that has the most laws, dedicated to whom? Dedicated to the woman. Far before the Western civilization can claim that they were the first to give the rights to the woman, Islam came more than 1400 years ago and gave them their rights in the Quran, in the Hadith, in the Sharia of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let's compare. Let's take some examples in order to understand. And the reason again why we are going to discuss this in some details, and I felt like it was important to do some research into this, is because, like I mentioned already, Islam gets attacked for this. You find many people saying Muslims are oppressive to their women, which is not the truth. It is Islam that gave the rights to the women. If there are some traditions and cultures and people that are oppressive or that are oppressing their women, that's not what Islam teaches. You cannot paint the picture upon Islam when it is from the evil doings of certain so-called Muslims. Just like how any Christian or non-Muslim, they do something wrong, you cannot say that they represent Christianity. Just so like if some Muslim, so-called Muslim men, they do something wrong, you cannot say that it is Islam that teaches this, because we're going to learn in the surah the rights that Islam gave to the women. And those who are not giving these rights are not following the laws of Islam and the laws of the Quran. So you cannot say that it is Islam that is oppressive. It is some of the so-called Muslims that have no knowledge of the Quran that are doing such things. Prior to Islam, in the days of Jahiliyyah, many of the girls and the women, they would be buried alive. And there were for many reasons. Maybe for the sake, because they were in poverty, they didn't know how they would, provide for the newborn, or because they felt that woman was a disgrace to the family, they would bury the girls alive. Islam came and said, Inna Allah harrama alaykum wa'd al-banat. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Allah Ta'ala has prohibited to bury alive girls, and to bury them, this is prohibited. And the Quran also mentioned this as well. Allah Ta'ala also says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشَّةَ إِمْلَاقٍ. Do not kill your family or your children out of fear of poverty. Haram. More than 1400 years ago when Islam first came, these rights were given. Let's look at ancient Greece and ancient Rome. In ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they used to kill their children, especially the female children. There was a concept known as exposure. In ancient Greece and Rome, there was a concept that was known as exposure. What was this concept? They would expose their children. How? They would leave them alone in the wild, and they would die out of starvation, or they would die out of extreme thirst, or they would die by animal attacks. The animals would attack them and they would die, or they would drown these children. This was in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and this was even legal at the time until later on it became illegal. However, they used to have this concept of killing their children, especially when it came to the girls. And if we look in the Middle Ages, in between the 5th century and 15th century, we see a lot of oppression that was being done to the women. Even if you read the ancient Roman literature, you would find these written in their books. You would find it there. And even many people, when they were going through the lands of these Romans, they would find the bodies of these children. They would find the remains. So this is a fact. It is not based on conjecture. It is not based on, weak proof. It is fact. And it has been proven factually. So there was a lot of oppression that were being done to the women, and this continued all the way until the 19th century. Whereas the Quran mentioned 1400 years ago, more than 1400, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with the woman with justice in a recognized manner. Treat the woman properly. And this is why Surat An-Nisa was revealed. This is why many ahadith are there as well. Treat women with dignity, treat women with respect. But this was not found in the Middle Ages all the way until the 19th and 20th century. That is one matter. Another matter is education. Many people, they say the Muslims, they ban their women from education. Whereas we know Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was a scholar. She used to narrate hadith. She used to learn and teach many women as well. So Islam was never against the concept of education, never. Yes, it was against if it was done in a wrong way, mixing and all these things that are against the laws of Sharia. That's a different topic. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ. That seeking religious knowledge is obligatory upon every single Muslim, male and female, not only male. It was obligatory upon the females as well. And we find many sahabiyat, including Aisha radiallahu anha, a great scholar. We learn a lot of Islam from Aisha radiallahu anha. Let's look at the West when it comes to, in regards to education. Till the mid-19th century, a lot of the institutions of higher learning were closed to women. Women were not admitted into higher education in America and in Central Europe as well. The first college actually to admit women was the Auburn College in Ohio. They were the first to admit women into this college in 1837, 19th century. How late? Very late, not even, maybe less than 200 years ago. The first Ivy League college to accept women was Cornell College in 1870. And many of the other Ivy League colleges, they actually accepted well into the 1900s, even though they were founded 200 years ago. Let's look at the college nearby in New Haven, Connecticut, Yale College. Yale College was actually founded in 1701. Do you know when was the first year where they admitted and they allowed women? 1969. How many years later? Harvard College was founded in 1636. The first year they admitted women was 1972. Many, many years later. So this concept of education for women was not found in the Western world until just a few hundred years ago, or maybe 100, 150 years ago. But Islam allowed and actually recommended and obligated education and knowledge for the men and for the women as well. Another concept we can look at is the right to property. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in this very surah of Surah An-Nisa, لِلْرِجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا كَسَبُوا. For the men, they own and they deserve what they earn. Whatever is for men belongs to the men. وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا. For the women, they deserve and they own whatever they have earned. The husband has his own wealth, the woman has her own wealth. No one will be taking the wealth of one another. This is injustice, this is dhulm. Taking somebody else's wealth unlawfully, this is dhulm. It is oppression, no doubt about it. Anybody can tell you that. Let's look at what was going on in the West. In England, there was a doctrine known as the doctrine of coveture. What was this doctrine calling for? This doctrine was calling for that after marriage, when a woman marries a man, all of her property will automatically belong to the husband. And the husband can do whatever he wants. He can take it, invest it, give it to somebody. Whatever he wanted to do with it, he was allowed to do. This was the doctrine of coveture. You can read about it. This was found in England. And this was there all the way until 1870, when there was an act that was passed known as the Married Women's Property Act. And how long ago was this? About 150 years ago. Prior to that, the wealth belonged automatically to the husband. And just about 150 years ago, these acts were passed, giving the women their rights. Whatever they own, it is theirs. Whatever they earn, it is theirs. Nobody has a right in it, like what the Quran said more than 1400 years ago. Whatever the man earned, it is his even after marriage. Whatever the woman owns after marriage, it is hers. How can it go to the husband? This is dhulm, this is injustice. And that's why the Quran came way prior than 150 years ago and gave these rights to the woman. Let's look at inheritance. Even after this act, like again we said, most of these rights came to the woman in the 19th or the 20th century. When it came to inheritance, this law that was passed in 1870 also helped and aided in that. But the Law of Property Act of 1922 allowed the couple to inherit from one another. Prior to that, women were not allowed to inherit. They were not able to. 19th and 20th century, early 20th century, 19th century. There was actually a common English law. There was a common English law that said that the inheritance belongs to the eldest son. And this was there until it just recently got abolished in the 19th and 20th century. In English, in the common British English law, there was the law that when a father dies or anyone dies, the inheritance will go to the eldest son. When he dies, it will go to his sons. So the process and the chain is such that the woman will never inherit. It will go from one son to the other son to the other son. If the eldest son is not alive, the next male son will get it, and then to his sons and to his sons, all the way down until just recently, this law got abolished. We can read about this as well. It was the Quran in Surat An-Nisa, in the beginning, which we will see, in a few weeks, the laws of inheritance has come. And nobody can change the laws of inheritance. You want to give extras to one son and leave out the daughter, you cannot do so. Because the laws have been made in the Quran. You cannot touch it, you cannot change it. The laws of who gets what share has been mentioned in the Quran. More than 1400 years ago, and only recently, the women in the West, by law, they were able to inherit from their husband or from anyone that passed away of their family members. Let's move on and look at the laws of divorce. And this is another thing, that the enemies of Islam, they point their fingers at Islam and the Muslims, the laws of divorce. When it comes to divorce, we know that the ultimate ownership, or whatever you want to call it, of divorce is in the hands of the husband. And this doesn't mean that the woman has no choice of divorce. And again, the reason why the woman cannot just divorce herself or issue divorce on her husband, it is pretty obvious. Why? Because the way Allah Ta'ala made men is different than the way Allah Ta'ala made women. And this is a known fact that the woman can agree and accept this as well, that their actions and their responses and their decisions oftentimes, more than not, are purely based on emotion. But the men, they can control their emotion. And this is why now, before we get on to what was the laws of divorce prior, nowadays now it is legal for a man and woman, any one of them, to divorce in the common law in the West. What do we find? 70% of divorce is initiated by women. When they are college educated, 90% of divorce is initiated by women, which is why more than half of the marriages are ending in divorce. Why? Because of the law that is given. This is a separate topic. But when it comes to Islam, if there is a legitimate excuse, if the husband is not taking care of the wife, not taking care of her financial needs, her bodily needs, oppressing her, abusing her, she can do khul'a and she can be free from her nikah. If the husband doesn't agree, she can go to the Sharia board, she can go to the Muftis, and if they see there is legitimate proof, then he can have the right to end the nikah. So there is ways where the woman can free herself from an abusive or from a wrong or from a marriage in which her rights are not being fulfilled. But again, the ultimate ownership does not lie in their hands because of what we are seeing now. And anybody can agree why Islam has given this. If we look at the divorce laws in the West prior to what we are seeing now, divorce was not legal in many of the Christian countries. If you get married, you cannot get divorced. Doesn't matter what's going on. And we know it is nature that men are more powerful over women, both in terms of strength. This is just known. This is a known fact. So as we mentioned already, in Islam, if there is such abuse or whatnot, the nikah can be annulled. But in the Christian countries, no matter what happens, you get married, it is illegal to divorce. In many Christian countries, some of them, this divorce became legal towards the end of the 1900s and the beginning of the 2000s, 1990, 2000, the early 2000s. In many European countries, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, they just legalized divorce just a few years ago. And actually, there are 2 countries in the world now where divorce is still illegal. Those 2 countries, one is Vatican City and one is the Philippines. In Philippines, for the Christians, there is a way for the Muslims who live in the Philippines, they are allowed, based on their religion, to initiate divorce. But for the Christians and the non-Muslims, it is illegal to get divorced. Currently, now, 2025, it is illegal to get divorced in Philippines for the Christians. So it doesn't matter what is going on. If there is abusive relation, whatever is going on. And this is the laws of divorce when it comes to the Western world compared to what Islam has allowed, which we already read in Surah Al-Baqarah, and also more rights are being mentioned here in Surat An-Nisa. And all of these rights have been given to the woman more than 1400 years ago. So if anyone raises the objection that Islam is abusive and oppressive to the woman, these are just simple answers we can give than the many answers that we already have. And we see what is going on, how they are empowering the women. This is a different topic, but what we have to understand is it is Islam that treats the woman as royalty. Even when it comes to work, Khadija radiallahu anha, she was a businesswoman. She was a very wealthy businesswoman. Islam allowed for women to engage in business, provided that they meet all the laws of Sharia and they do not pass the boundaries and the laws that are set by the Sharia. And all her profits was hers. Nobody can take it. Until just very recently, the 19th century, the women, especially in the Middle Ages, they were barred from working. They could not work. And they were being oppressed. So all of these things, now the Western world is saying we gave the right to look at Islam, but they fail to realize the reality. They fail to realize the truth and the history. And these are all recorded. And anybody who wants, they can read for it themselves. So this is very important to understand before we even get into the surah, especially living nowadays, all these attacks and these fingers that are being raised against the Muslims and Islam. We have to educate ourselves and know what our Sharia has taught us, what the Quran has taught us as well. Then the surah moved on and speaks about again the ahkam and the laws of inheritance. And also the surah speaks about which women are haram to marry. There are 3 categories of women which a man is prohibited from marrying. This will also be discussed later on in this surah as well. This surah also discusses marriage laws, the rights of a husband over the woman, the rights of the woman over the husband, and how mahar, which is also established in the surah, that you have to give the mahar. That is coming up as well. And it explains how mahar is not a price to buy the woman. This is not what mahar is. Mahar is rather a gift of affection that strengthens the emotional bond, that shows that a husband is serious in taking care of the woman. It is not something that we are buying them, na'udhu billah. It is just a token of a gift to show our affection to the woman. And also the surah will move on and speak about the steps men should take when they find a lot of conflict and problems, because the men, they have been given qawwam, they have been made in charge, not in charge in terms of power where you can abuse them, but in charge in terms of taking the manly approach in solving conflicts that are 100% going to appear in every single marriage. The surah also explains the steps the men should take in order to minimize the conflict. And when there is a conflict and an issue, what should the men do? When there is a conflict, what should be done? How should the family get involved? What are the rights? What should be done? The surah also explains that as well. After explaining many of the marriage laws, the surah then goes on to explain social life and how it is very important to do good to all categories of people, whether it is women, whether it is orphans, because that's the introduction of the surah. But later on, the surah will not limit itself to only women and men and husband and wife and orphans. It will move on and speak about neighbors. It will move on and explain and talk about the rights of travelers, the rights of the masakeen and the fuqara. Women and orphans are just an introduction of the surah, which explains, and the theme of the surah, which we will see from the very beginning, is giving rights to the human beings. Whether they are women, whether they are orphans, whether they are neighbors, whether they are kuffar, whoever they are, this surah explains giving rights to the people. And then the surah will move on and speak about the plots of the enemies and some ahkam of jihad. And the surah will end off by explaining the misguidance of the Christians with regard to their belief in the Trinity when it comes to Isa alayhi salam. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَقُولُوا ثَلَاثَ, don't say 3. إِنَّمَا اللَّهُ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ, Allah ta'ala is only one and not 3. This will be explained towards the end of the surah. So it was very important to give an introduction to the surah, to explain the status of women in Islam, to explain what are the rights and what the surah will discuss. That way it paves the path into starting the surah. And of course, every single ayah in the surah is filled with explanation. It's filled with wisdom. Every single ayah can take a long time if we actually ponder over this beautiful surah. It's a very beautiful surah, and it tells us how we are to live with our family and how we are to live with society and how we are to live with all humans in general. This is why the study of the surah is very important. This is why I gave the extra time, the whole session actually, in just explaining what the surah is talking about and explaining certain rights and comparing it to the Western world, and that we educate ourselves and we are not fooled when the fingers are being raised now, we know how to answer. So may Allah Ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to understand and act upon what has been said. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.